Hi, everyone. Welcome to Studio Sessions episode 7 called New Logo, New Me. If you're not super familiar with Studio Sessions, this is a monthly live stream event that the Globe Content Studio hosts with guests like Dani, where we talk about all things content. If you're not super familiar with the Globe Content Studio, we are the content marketing division of the Globe and Mail. I should probably introduce myself. My name is Stacie Campbell. I am the creative lead for the content studio. So my job in a nutshell is to kind of touch on all things design and design strategy for any project that comes through the studio. So I want to introduce my guest. I'm super excited to have her here today. This is Dani Roche. She's
Hi,
actually
Stacie.
yeah, she's actually an old friend of mine. So we kind of go way back about 10 years. But she's also the owner, director, founder of Kastor Pollux, which is a creative studio here in Toronto. So I want to pass it to you, Dani, and you can kind of give us a little bit of your background so we could get to know you a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me here today, Stacie. It's been so awesome to see what you've been doing over at the Globe Content Studio, and it's honestly my honor to chat with you today about branding and rebranding. So, in a nutshell, my name is Dani, and I am a graphic designer by trade, and a content creator slash creative director slash everything in between. Castor Pollux is my design studio, which basically does everything from branding projects to experiential marketing activations and more. As Stacie mentioned, we have been friends for about 10 years, and it's been so interesting to see our individual evolutions. We started off in editorial, with Stacie being in fashion school and me trying to pursue a funny career as a fashion blogger back in the early aughts. And we've seen each other, agency side through tech, and obviously now we're here. So today, I'm really excited to dive into a little bit more of like the nuances of branding and what that entails, as well as hear about what Stacie and her team are working on, because there's a lot of exciting things happening, I think.
Yes, yeah, there are. And we'll get to that definitely a little bit later because there's a few exciting things, an event we're hosting next month, and we really want to touch on that. But I kind of want to take it back one step. I feel like a lot of people listening might be in the design world, but some of them might be in adjacent industries. So maybe we could talk a little bit about branding as a whole, and how design fits into that. And yeah, if we can just start from there, kind of what is branding to you?
I mean, I think that you don't need to be a designer or someone who even values himself as like any sort of creative in order to be someone who's engaging with brands. Branding is truly everywhere around us, whether it's, the ads that we engage with on social media or the fast food logos that we look for when we're on a road trip driving on the highway. So what is great as being a visual designer is I can really hone in on those stories and be able to depict like brands in visual ways. But there's so many different components to branding other than just the visual side. And I know, Stacie, that you are also a visual designer. How would you define branding?
Yeah, so it's kind of tricky when I was making that question because branding can be so many things to so many different people. Like there's actual people whose job is a brand manager and they're all about like managing the tone of voice, how consumers view the brand. But then there's also people like me who come from a brand design background. So that's kind of how I look at a brand. There's a whole bunch of things to it. Like there's obviously the way it looks, but there's like I mentioned, the tone of voice, how people interpret you. But when I'm thinking of a brand, I'm coming at it from the design point of view. So for me, it's definitely, if I'm scrolling through social media and I'm looking at a post of your brand, I'm obviously looking with my eyes and I'm kind of judging with that. So it's kind of branding to me is that first impression that you get when you're seeing something visually for the first time. So for me, it's definitely about like the typography you use, the colors we use, photography, just like the overall vibe that someone gets from looking at your product or your brand. So that's kind of how I would put it. But again, there's a whole bunch of ways you can look at it. But from the design point of view, that's definitely where I'm coming from, at least.
Yeah, I think the makings of an iconic brand have to start with a recognizable brand identity, and a
Mhm.
recognizable brand identity has to start with a solid brand guideline or, you know, a universal source of truth. So people who are either internal or external to the company can really get a sense of, what that brand says, what it looks like from a logo, typography, colors perspective, but also translates well into a variety of mediums. So we have that consistency across the board. Should we
Mhm.
talk about brand guidelines, maybe?
Yeah, definitely. We could talk about brand guidelines, but we could also do so when we're approaching like a branding project. Is there like steps that you have or that you take when someone like a client comes to you and says, I want you to create my brand, Dani? Is there something that you follow? I assume that brand guidelines would be in there somewhere, but I'd love to hear a bit about kind of your process and how that might work.
Yeah, I mean, because we're both on the visual side and we're very much like, I want to, I'm attracted to things that look aesthetically pleasing. And, as designers, we're actually making those things.
Mhm.
In order for us to even get there, we need to understand what that tone of voice is, what that story is, and, how we're going to respond to that entire like backstory in order to like actually create something visual. So when I'm starting a project, I really need to understand like why I'm doing this, like what the company or client is looking to achieve, either, when they're starting a new brand or looking to refresh their old one. And I don't know, like I think to be a designer, you need to kind of be curious by nature because it's not just a job about pushing pixels around. It's really trying to get into like the meat and potatoes of like what problem you're trying to solve. So for
Mhm.
me, it's always a series of discovery calls, a lot of research and development, understanding like who that company deems as like a competitor or a brand that they want to be adjacent to, and really doing my due diligence by, doing that back work before I can even start by looking at the fonts that I want to look at or like picking out the colors that I think would suit the brand. Having as much information to start off with will like ultimately make my job as a designer a lot easier and also give a lot more longevity to that brand because the visual stuff will really match up with their long-term objectives. Would you have anything to add to that?
No, yeah, I think that's all really valid. I feel like when you're given a branding project, it can be really monumental and be kind of hard to start. So something we're actually doing a rebrand project for the Globe Content Studio itself. So when I was given that project from Sean, who's the head of the studio, I was kind of like, this is super daunting. But then I kind of broke it down into different steps. So we kind of met with the key stakeholders and discussed like what is it that we're wanting to change, or how do you want to be perceived by clients, like how can we come together and find a starting point, and then go into the nitty gritty, like these are the typefaces we're going to use, or this is the color, kind of have a story behind it. So that's something that we're working on. We have an event on April 18th, I believe. It's going to be held at the Globe and Mail Center. So it's a content marketing summit. It's called Tactics and Takeaways. And yeah, and so for that, we kind of are going to use that as a little mini launch of the brand. So it's kind of tricky because the content studio is almost like a mini brand within this giant organization that is the Globe and Mail. So we kind of have to play within this little tiny sandbox, but we really do want to stand out and have our own point of view and our own look and feel. So we thought that the content marketing summit would be a really good way to do that and kind of come up with this identity that we can almost unveil and then iterate on. So going back to the original question, after all of that, like discussions with stakeholders, we're definitely like nailing down the different colors, the typefaces. We're even tweaking the logo a little bit. We're going to put that all together and create a brand guideline that we can use in the future to kind of create a consistent look and feel for the studio going forward, which is really exciting because it's something that we haven't had yet. And I think it would really, benefit us and kind of push us in the right direction. So,
Yeah, I always love to hear when companies, like, are really adamant on investing in the branding because ultimately branding, is very
mhm.
much in tandem with marketing, and marketing makes money. And
Yeah.
ultimately, like, your brand and the visual, representation of, like, what you're trying to do is what is going to get people interested, engaged, and, uh the tool that really helps people recognize you. So I'm
Mhm.
personally very excited to see what you guys have worked on. I think that that's such an amazing, step forward, and April cannot come soon enough.
Yes, very exciting, very daunting, but very exciting. But yeah, only like a month away, so super exciting. So I kind of talked about the different elements. Like once everything is nailed down, you do pick like your fonts and your colors and all these brand design elements. How do you apply all of these together to like make a product come to life on social or on a website? Or could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I mean, earlier when we were kind of prepping for today, you and I were talking about this idea that, if a brand guideline is a universal source of truth, how much flexibility is there within those guidelines to make something new? And one thing that I wanted to point out was that, they're called guidelines for a reason. We should see brand guidelines as a starting point or a jumping off point where we can then look at like what the baseline of this brand needs to look like and what it needs to say, but be able to iterate on some of those elements depending on what the purpose is. So for whether it's a campaign or an event or some kind of like experiential activation, um, using those guidelines to make something new and dynamic is really helpful. And in my career, I've had the pleasure of working on things from like, yeah, events and like large scale installations and pop ups. And when I'm hired by a client, like obviously like my mind is running wild and I'm like, I want to like be super creative and think outside of the box. But you
Mhm.
also have these parameters that you need to refer to, not necessarily replicate, but make sure that what you're building aligned visually and like in terms of like brand ethos as well to the company that's hiring you. So
Mhm.
some starting off points that I have to look at is like, what are we making? Where is it living? Who are we speaking to? And what elements of that brand guideline do I need to apply in order to like kind of tick all those boxes and make sure that everything is lining up right? Um, Simply, we can talk about like signage for an event, right? Like if we have a family of 3 or 4 different fonts, there really is no need for me to go outside of those guidelines because I have options to choose from, and it's signage for wayfinding or something like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
But when it comes to something more creative, like maybe building out a photo moment where, you want people to be able to shoot things for social media and for marketing purposes, maybe there's boundaries that we can push to really you know make what we're building as successful as possible and going outside of those guidelines. When you are building out the new brand for Globe Content Studio, like what kind of things were you thinking outside of just like your digital presence and how the brand shows
Yeah.
up digitally?
Yeah, definitely. I think so once we gather all of those branding elements, I think social media is a really fun way to play with them. It's like it's not the most rigid medium and it's kind of where brands can go to play off trends and still keep in their guidelines, but I think that's a really fun way and something we can use in the future for the studio to sort of bring our personality out a bit more. I think for us as a studio, obviously the Globe and Mail is a 100 something year old company. It's very I don't want to use the word serious, but it's like a journalism business. So it's got its own rules and regulations, but we want to have our own identity in that. And I think, having a little bit of that, but then also coming off a little bit more playful, a little bit more forward is something that we're also kind of looking for. And we can play with that in social or like at our event that we're hosting in April. It's just picking and choosing the right moments to sort of have different parts of your brand come through that I think is really interesting. And I really liked when you were touching on um, basically like where and when to use different elements. So I found when I was first starting out, I found it really difficult to design for like what I wanted versus like what's right for the brand or the client. So I think that's something that's really interesting and something, I guess, like a word of advice that I could pass on to any younger designers who might be watching is kind of finding that balance of like your aesthetic, your design, and versus what the brand or the client is looking for too, which I know you obviously have a ton of experience in. But not to go on a tangent, I do have another question that I wanted to ask you. So we're kind of talking about all these very factual steps, like we're creating a brand, you're going to talk with stakeholders, you're going to pick out colors, fonts. Is there any, I'd love to hear of any struggles or challenges you might have faced when making a brand. I know I have a few myself, but I'd love to hear if you've encountered anything like that.
Well, I mean, it kind of goes back to what you were just talking about putting your own personal preferences aside from
Mhm.
what the project is. And I think design is something where you need to go in to the field without having an ego.
Mhm.
Because as a designer, like you're ultimately a service provider. You're here to listen, to learn, and then to solve a problem. It's not necessarily about being like, I'm going to die on this hill that's the wrong color green. It's like if the client has like an idea about what they want, as a designer, you can nudge them in a different direction by rationalizing like why XYZ might work better. But ultimately, like you can't take it personally. And I think when I
Yeah.
talk to a
Mhm.
lot of young designers, like it's a lot about learning how to take critique in a way that doesn't feel super personal. Um,
Mhm.
and more so is just something that kind of comes part and parcel with providing a service for someone. So
Mhm.
I would say that I still haven't like 100% figured it out. There's still definitely times when I'm working on a project and I feel very frustrated or kind of just like down and out because the work isn't moving towards a direction where I originally imagined it to be. But there's other ways that you can express yourself outside of client work, right?
Yes,
That you can get
exactly.
your
Yeah.
creative energy out. And one piece of advice that I would have for any young designer starting out is to take these kind of corporate or client facing projects as great learning experiences for you to practice communication, patience, and designing without ego. And then if you really need to express yourself creatively, to just design for the sake of designing, because I don't know how I don't know, I actually don't remember how you started out, Stacie, but I can talk from my own experience.
Yeah.
And I started designing because I literally just wanted to make things. I didn't, ever foresee myself working with the clients that I've worked with or having the opportunities that I've had. I literally was just like a 12-year-old being like, "What's Photoshop?" And being like, "I think I'll play." And that's what design should be at its core,
Mhm.
right? It's play, it's exploration, it's learning new things, it's discovery, and then being able to apply that passion towards, like those bigger projects that will hopefully sustain you in your life.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. That kind of reminds me when I was first starting out, when I was working on a client project, I really wanted it to go a certain way, like you were mentioning, and I kind of had to pivot and do more what the client wanted. And my manager at the time told me, let's make it how they want it and do the best you can. And then how about after you go in and you make it how you want it to be, just so you can have that and you could do that exploration and it can kind of satisfy that need. But at in the end, like you're making a product for a client, and that's like the goal of being a brand designer. So just a little
Yeah.
to add a little tidbit onto that.
And also,
And
like, some things that some tactics that you could use if you are really struggling with, you know being stubborn with
Mhm.
clients, is finding rationalizations that
Right.
can better explain your decisions or, like, your hopes for the work. It's less about being like, "I think that that's ugly," and
Yeah.
more so like, "Oh, let's talk about colors," for instance. Like,
Mhm.
you know how, like, different colors connote different meanings? It could
Yeah.
literally be as simple as, like, "Did you know that green stands for calm and nature?"
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
just finding, like, factual things like that, and I'm not saying, like, that's the be all end all, example, but, like, being able to actually show, like, you know, like, facts
Yeah.
behind, like, creative decisions, because the reality is, like, not everyone is creative, not everyone can, like, visualize what you have in your head. So the best thing that you can do is try your best to do your due diligence and really map out these ideas and, like, build a case for why you want to do what you wanna do.
Mhm. Yeah, like, have a rationale. I kind of find, like, if you do have the opportunity to sit down and talk with a client, just like being a storyteller too is something that clients are always looking for in a way to like sell your designs too. So that's another way around one of those struggles that you mentioned. One of the struggles that I have is when I'm kind of starting a design, I kind of like think about it in this huge way where it's like, this is so final. Like, what if I put this out and this person doesn't like it, or what if they interpret it this way? So it's almost like overcoming like the finality of the whole thing. Could you maybe touch on like, is a brand when you design it, is it final? Like, or is there opportunity to iterate on it as you go, or how often should you iterate on it? Yeah, I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
I don't think that there's any, like, concrete rules on, like, what you can or cannot do when it comes to a brand. Ultimately, like, the goal when you're designing a visual brand identity is you want to create a brand that is recognizable and that can stand the test of time. But
Mhm.
depending on, like, new competitors in the market, a changing economical landscape, like, so many different factors, like, if the brand is not suiting your needs anymore, I don't think that there's anything wrong with rebranding. I think that the
Mhm.
challenge is maybe when we're talking like big corporations and like you're funneling down all of these like
Yeah.
we're not making money. Like, is it because of the brand? It's like it's hard to justify like asking for more money or more spend to redo something that might have just been done before. And I think
Mhm.
that's why, like the creative team is often at the bottom of the barrel a lot of time because people are like, the ad team will make the revenue. But it's like, no, it's like the creative team that gives the ad team the assets
Mhm.
to make the revenue. So I think that everything's kind of interconnected. But if you out there listening, if you have your own business or you're starting your business and you're thinking of creating a brand identity or refreshing your old one, um, don't feel too tied to any specific rules. Do what you think works best and suits your needs. And you can always just take the brand that exists and tweak it ever so slightly to either modernize it or, shift it in a different direction. It doesn't have to be a complete redo. And there's so
Mhm.
many different ways, whether that's through, photography assets or even new copywriting that's not visual, but it's, the back end of the brand, but still very forward facing. Like you can do so many different things that can breathe new life into your brand. And
Mhm.
yeah, I personally don't think that there's any hard and fast rules. And Stacie, like if feeling like what you work on has a lot of pressure because of like the finality of it, like don't worry, I would
Yeah.
say. Like things are changing all the time and it's not up to you to be a mind reader and to tell like what the future holds. So I don't know, like being in design is so exciting because there's so many different ways that you can take that career by learning new things, staying curious, asking questions and all of that. So I think that we're both very lucky to be able to be in careers that we love where we can constantly explore, talk to people, have these great conversations, and
Mhm.
hopefully just keep getting better as designers.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I feel so obviously feel so lucky to be in an industry like this and really lucky to be kind of sitting here with you 10 years later after all the trials and tribulations. It's been really cool to see us both grow and kind of watch each other from the sidelines. So definitely really just happy and grateful to be here. And yeah, I think if we don't have any other questions in the chat, that was kind of all I had. Dani, did you have anything else you wanted to add or anything about Kastor Pollux you wanted to shout out or?
No, I think I'm totally good, but I wanted to send my appreciation once again for, chatting today and, hearing a little bit about what you guys are working on.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I can't wait for April 18th and,
Yes, yeah.
see all your work pay off.
Yeah, definitely. And I'll get our team to throw a link in the chat so you can sign up to come to the Content Marketing Summit on April 18th. It's free of charge. It's at the Globe and Mail Center. There's going to be snacks. There's going to be comfortable seats. You're not going to have to sit in a plastic chair. It's actually going to be fun, I promise. So sign up
I'm
if you
sold.
can. Yeah, sign up if you can. And yeah, if you have any questions on designer branding, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I hope to talk to you soon, Dani.
Great. Thanks, Stacie. And yeah, take care, everyone. And thanks for tuning in.
Bye.